My life has always flowed along the course that I myself have laid out for it. 73 years of practice have allowed me to perfect this process. Every morning I wake up at 6 o'clock without an alarm clock. My internal clock works perfectly. A cup of strong tea without sugar, toast with butter, 15 minutes of watching the news. Not a minute more, only to get upset. Then the obligatory walk, regardless of the weather. Riverton's a small town, but it's got character, just like me. Over the years, we've grown to like each other. My name is Aidan Blackwood, and in my late teens, I've found that people around me think I'm a grouch. Perhaps they're right. Or perhaps, in 40 years as a criminal psychologist, I've simply seen enough of human nature to stop harboring illusions. People are predictable, selfish, and rarely change. My late wife Veronica called it an occupational deformity, but with love. She passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. Quickly as she wanted. No long goodbyes. After her death, I finally retired and began to master the difficult art of being a widower. Lines of condolence calls, lonely dinners, conversations with pictures. It's just the way it is. Gradually, I developed a system. Riverton apartment for the winter, summer house in the suburbs for the summer. It worked perfectly until my son's family interfered. Raven is an only child and a perpetual misunderstanding. Where I went wrong in my parenting, I can't figure out to this day. Maybe I worked too hard. Perhaps I was too demanding. Whatever the case, my son grew up the complete opposite of me. Soft-hearted, compliant, with a touching faith in human kindness. With that combination of qualities, it's no wonder he fell right into Petunia Scarlett's trap. Oh, Petunia, the sister-in-law I've had to put up with for 14 years. A woman with the manipulative skills of a professional spy and a complete lack of any moral restraints. The first time I met her, she said I reminded her of Anthony Hopkins. As Hannibal Lecter, she added with a chuckle that was meant to soften the phrase. I replied that she reminded me of some of my patients. We've maintained armed neutrality ever since. Petunia gave me 3 grandchildren, Ethan, 12, Eliana, 10, and Oliver, 8. Kids are just like kids, noisy, messy, constantly tethered to their gadget screens. We saw each other at the obligatory family gatherings, and I honestly tried to be the grandpa from the TV shows, with lollipops in my pockets and wise counsel. But Petunia always stood between us, controlling every interaction, as if afraid I would infect the kids with my directness or, heaven forbid, teach them to think for themselves. So Raven's phone call that Tuesday came as a complete surprise to me. Dad, I need your help, he said without preamble. I'm listening. We need to do some repairs on the house right away. There's a problem with the foundation, and we can't put it off. Petunia and I will live in a rented apartment, but it's too small for all of us. I could feel where the wind was blowing before he finished his sentence. And we thought... He hesitated. Anyway, the kids will need to stay with you for about 6 months. I almost dropped my phone. 6 months? With 3 kids? Raven, are you out of your mind? I can't... Dad, please. His voice trembled, which rarely happened. We really don't have any other options. Petunia's parents can't take them in. They've got a housing situation there, and all the other relatives live too far away from the kids' school. What about your mother-in-law? She has a huge apartment, as I recall. Her arthritis has gotten worse. She can barely manage on her own. I chuckled. It was amazing how the whole Petunia family always found good reasons to avoid any inconvenience. Sir, what about the cottage, I asked, referring not to my own but to their country house, bought with the money I'd given them for the wedding. We sold it last year, Raven answered so quietly that I barely heard. There were financial difficulties. I didn't bother asking why I didn't know about it. Our relationship had long ago become a set of formalities. 6 months, I said again, imagining my routine turning into chaos. I was just about to leave for the summer. Take the kids with you. They could use the fresh air. Raven, my summer house is my sanctuary. It's the only place where I can... Dad, he interrupted me. I wouldn't have asked if there was another solution. Petunia's on the verge of a nervous breakdown over all this renovation. And the kids, it would be good for them to spend time with you. They hardly know their grandfather. And whose fault is that, I wanted to ask, but held back. An inner voice, suspiciously similar to Veronica's, reminded me that this might be the last chance to mend relations with my grandchildren. Time is not infinite, especially at my age. When do you plan to bring them? Tomorrow, Raven answered quickly, as if afraid I'd change my mind. Thanks, Dad. You don't know how important this is to us. I nodded silently, though he couldn't see it, and clicked off. Did my son really think I was going to believe this story about the sudden renovation and the inability to place the kids anywhere else? Raven had never been good at lying. Another difference between us. But what's the real reason? What game is Petunia playing this time? I walked to the window. The view of the Kate River, gently carrying its waters through Riverton, always calmed me. I'd bought this apartment 30 years ago because of that view. Watching the water flow is like meditating. Now I have to share this space with three little tornadoes. My cottage is 20 miles outside of town, in a place the locals call Pine Hills. It's a 4-bedroom house built by my parents, with a spacious porch and a 2-acre lot. Over the years, I've turned it into the perfect place for a single person, a vegetable garden that feeds me all summer long, a library with a wall of detectives collected over a lifetime, a silence broken only by birdsong and rustling leaves. I usually leave there in early May and return in late September, when the nights get too cold for my old bones. Now it was the end of April, and I had already started packing. Petunia's plan, and I had no doubt it was her plan, was disrupting my schedule. Well, I would have to adapt. Perhaps I can really bond with my grandchildren. After all, they are an extension of Veronica, even if diluted with Petunia's genes. I looked at the picture of my wife on the dresser. Veronica in a wide-brimmed hat laughing, looking somewhere outside the frame. It was at our Dacha about 20 years ago. She always said I was too hard on Raven. You're a psychologist, she reminded me. Can't you see that your criticism only repels him? But I believed I was preparing my son for the real world. The world was tougher than I thought it would be. What do you think, Veronica? I asked the picture. Will I be able to handle 3 kids? The picture was silent, but I thought that my wife's smile became a little wider. The next morning began with a rush. I rearranged furniture in the guest room, cleared shelves in the bathroom, checked to make sure there was enough food in the fridge for 3 growing bodies. I had to Google what today's kids eat. The results were pizza, nuggets, and other fast food. I decided that my buckwheat porridge with stewed vegetables would be a culture shock for them, but useful. The doorbell rang at 11 sharp. On the doorstep stood Raven, Petunia, and the 3 children with backpacks and suitcases. A lot more luggage than I'd expected. Hello, Daddy, Raven hugged me. I patted him awkwardly on the back. Aiden, Petunia nodded with a strained smile. Thank you for agreeing to help. It's so important to us. She was dressed far too smartly for a visit to her father-in-law. Expensive dress, makeup, hair definitely from a salon. Doesn't look like a woman plagued by renovation problems. Grandpa Aiden! Oliver, the youngest, suddenly rushed over to hug me. I stroked his head in confusion. Ethan, the oldest, discreetly extended his hand for a handshake like an adult. Eliana clung to her mother, eyeing me warily. Come on in, I stepped aside, letting everyone into the apartment. The next hour passed in chaos. Petunia gave instructions on how to care for the children, as if she'd left them with an incompetent nanny rather than her own grandfather. Eliana's special diet, Oliver's allergy to strawberries, the need to make sure Ethan didn't spend all his time playing computer games, school schedules, clubs, vitamins, the peculiarities of each child's character. The information was pouring in. I wrote it down, I finally interrupted, and I'll manage. Of course you will. Petunia smiled that smile that always made me want to check that all the valuable things were in place. The kids will call us every day, and we'll visit them regularly, of course. Of course, I nodded. Now why don't you tell me the real reason for this sudden visit? Petunia froze. Raven turned pale. What do you mean, Papa? He asked. I explained. We're renovating. Raven, I looked my son straight in the eye. I've been interrogating criminals for 20 years. You think I can't see when they're lying to me? There was silence. The children looked at each other with that special expression that children have when adults are ready to make a scene. Children, Petunia intervened, why don't you go unpack? Your grandfather will show you where the bathroom is. When it was just the three of us, she turned to me. I don't know what you mean. We're really renovating. If you want, I can show you pictures of the damage. The ones you downloaded off the internet 5 minutes ago? No, thank you. Just remember, I agreed to take the kids because they're my grandchildren and I love them. But I don't trust you, Petunia. I never have. Daddy, please. Raven held up his hands in a conciliatory gesture. We're all tired. Let's just what? Let's just pretend everything's okay? Okay, I'll take care of your kids. But I'll be watching. And if I find that I'm being used in any of your schemes, nobody's using you, Petunia cut you off. You're always suspicious of everyone. Professional deformity, I understand. But maybe, at least for the sake of the children, you could stop looking for ulterior motives in a simple request for help? I looked at her. Petunia held my gaze, but for a second, just a second, I noticed something I'd seen hundreds of times in the interrogation room. A micro-expression of guilt. Quick, barely noticeable, but definitely there. You should go, I said. You must have a lot to do with this. Repairs. They were gone in 15 minutes, leaving me alone with three wary children and the oppressive feeling that I had just accepted a part in someone else's play without even reading the script. Well, I looked at the grandchildren huddled in the corner of the living room like frightened chicks. Who wants buckwheat porridge? The first week with my grandchildren turned my orderly life into chaos comparable to a war zone. My apartment, once an oasis of peace and tranquility, became a battleground of scattered socks, unfinished sandwiches, and constantly running gadgets. I discovered that the younger generation was capable of existing in multiple realities at once. Physically present in the room, mentally they were on their phones, tablets, and laptops. Ethan, how much time do you spend on the computer? I asked my grandson on the third day, when I noticed that he practically did not take his eyes off the screen. I don't know, he shrugged without looking up. The usual amount. And what does the usual amount mean for your generation? Well, 12 hours a day? He finally pulled himself away from the monitor and looked at me. Why? I was speechless. 12 hours. When I was his age, we'd be outside all day, coming home for dinner with skinned knees and heads full of adventure. What about fresh air, physical activity, lively socializing? I tried not to sound like a typical grouchy old man, but I don't seem to be doing a good job. I have a fitness app. Ethan stared at the screen again. And I socialize on Discord. I had no idea what Discord was, so I decided not to go into it. Instead, I announced a new rule. No more than 4 hours of screen time a day. It was met with a storm of protest, but I remained adamant. To my surprise, it was Eliana, the middle granddaughter, who was the first to find an alternative activity. Grandpa, can I draw? She asked the next morning when her digital time was up. Sure, I was happy for any expression of creativity. I must have pencils and paper somewhere. I found an old box of Veronica's art supplies. My wife loved watercolors, though she never considered herself a true artist. Eliana accepted the box with awe, as if I had handed her a treasure. Are these grandmothers? She asked quietly. Yes. Was she a good painter? With love, I answered. And that's always the most important thing. Eliana nodded with unexpected seriousness and sat on the balcony with her sketchbook. By evening, she showed me a series of drawings, a house among the trees, very much like my country house, though she had never been there. In one of the drawings, there were many figures standing near the house. Who are these? I asked, pointing to the figures. These are just people. She quickly turned the sheet over. Made up. My internal radar, honed by years of working with people, beeped. Something was wrong, but I decided not to push it. For now. Oliver, the youngest, was both the easiest and the hardest to deal with. At 8 years old, he had an amazing curiosity and an equally amazing ability to make a mess wherever he went. He bombarded me with questions about everything from how a microwave works to why the universe exists. Grandpa, why are leaves green? Because of chlorophyll, which absorbs sunlight for photosynthesis. What is photosynthesis? Is a word? The process by which plants turn light into energy. Why can't they eat pizza like we do? It goes on and on. I found patiently answering his questions tedious, but also surprisingly enjoyable. The childlike directness was like a balm to my cynical soul, for the time being. On our 10th day together, I noticed the first oddity. Passing by the boys' room, I heard Ethan talking on the phone, clearly lowering his voice. "Yes, Mom. Everything is according to plan. No, he doesn't suspect anything. Yes, we do as you said. Of course, we won't say anything." I froze at the door. Then my suspicions are not unfounded. There is indeed a plan, and my grandchildren are part of it. But what is it? What is Petunia up to this time? That same evening, I mentioned my cottage in passing. "You know, I think we could all use a trip out of town. Why don't we go to my summer house this weekend? There's fresh air, a pond nearby, woods." The reaction was immediate and unanimous. "No!" All three of us practically exclaimed in unison. "Why?" I acted surprised. "Don't you want to get out of town?" We promised Mom we wouldn't go anywhere," Ethan said, obviously trying to think of a plausible reason. "She said she'd feel better if we stayed in town." "Yes," Eliana said, "and I have art class on Saturday." "And I'm afraid of spiders," Oliver added. "There are lots of them in the woods." Interesting. Very interesting. If this was a plan to distract me from the cottage, it was a pretty clumsy one. But given the age of the performers, I wouldn't have expected anything less. "Okay," I agreed. "Then maybe we could go to the park. It's within the city limits, no spiders, and you'll have time for all your classes." This time they couldn't object without arousing suspicion. We agreed to go to Riverton's Central Park on Saturday morning. The next strange occurrence happened a couple days later. I was coming back from the grocery store and heard Eliana talking on the phone on the balcony, thinking she was alone in the apartment. "Mom, but this isn't right." "Yes, I know what you said, but..." "No, I won't tell him, but I don't like lying to Grandpa. He's a good man." That last part suddenly touched me. Eliane thinks I'm good. It was the first time in a long time that someone in the family had used that definition of me. The conversation continued. "Yes, we talked him out of going to the cottage. I don't know. Maybe in a week he'll talk about it again." "Okay, we'll think of something else." So my hunch was confirmed. Petunia sent the kids to my place on purpose so I wouldn't go to the cottage. But why? What is there at my cottage that I shouldn't see? I didn't confront the children. Instead, I decided to continue observing and gathering information. If Petunia thinks she can beat the old criminal psychologist, she's sorely mistaken. In the park on Saturday morning, Oliver got to talking. We were sitting on a bench while the older ones were roller skating, and he suddenly asked, "Grandpa, do you love your dacha?" "Very much," I answered honestly. "It is a special place for me. And if other people lived there, would you be upset?" I almost choked. "Other people? In my summer house? Well, that depends on who the people are and why they're there. Saktana. And if they were relatives?" He continued with childlike directness. "Aunt Iris says relatives should always help each other." "Aunt Iris? Is that your mom's sister?" "Yeah," Oliver nodded. "She used to live far away, but now she's going to live closer. Mom said she'd found a new home for her." I tried to keep a neutral expression on my face, even though my insides were boiling. "Where is this new home?" "It's a secret." Oliver covered his mouth with his hand. "Oh, I shouldn't have said anything. Mom would be upset." "Don't worry," I rubbed his head. "It'll be our little secret." During lunch at a small cafe near the park, I noticed how the kids looked at each other every time I mentioned the cottage. I purposely did this a few times, as if thinking out loud. Maybe we should go to the cottage next weekend after all. The lilacs should be blooming there. "Grandpa, let's go to the water park instead." Eliane immediately suggested it. "Or to the movies," added Ethan. "There is a new movie about superheroes." Their persistence in trying to keep me from going to the cottage only strengthened my suspicions. In the evening, when the children had already gone to bed, I called my old friend Leonard Priestley, who lived not far from my cottage. We had kept in touch over the years, occasionally having a drink together when I visited for the summer. "Leonard, old sea wolf, how are you?" "Aiden, haven't heard from you in a while. When are you coming to the area?" I was planning on early May, but I had a family emergency." "Family emergency? Listen, could you do me a favor?" "Sure, old sport, anything." Could you drive by my cottage and see if everything's all right? It's just, I've got a funny feeling about it. Leonard chuckled. Your famous premonitions. Okay, I'll stop by tomorrow and give you a call. The next day, Sunday, the children were unusually quiet. Eliana was drawing nonstop. Ethan was staring at a book, for the first time during his stay with me, and Oliver was methodically building a complex construction from Lego cubes. I realized they were waiting for something, or someone. Toward evening, the phone rang. All three of us flinched. I'll answer it in the bedroom, I said and left, closing the door tightly behind me. It was Leonard. Aiden, old man, his voice sounded strange. Are you sitting up? What's the matter? I drove by your cottage like you asked and, he stammered. There's people there, Aiden. A lot of people. What do you mean, a lot? I felt a chill go down the back of my neck. I counted at least 12 people, Leonard answered. They obviously live there. Laundry drying on ropes, kids playing in the yard, someone barbecuing. I was silent, digesting the information. There's something else, Leonard continued. They're building some kind of addition on the back of the house. It looks like an extra room or something. They're building it? On my land? Without my permission? I'm afraid so. I thought I saw your sister-in-law there, but I'm not sure. Do you know about this? No, I said through gritted teeth, but I'll find out soon enough. When I returned to the living room, the children were looking at me with ill-concealed concern. Who called, Grandpa? Ethan asked me with feigned indifference. An old friend, I answered. He said hello from my cottage. The faces of all three of them stretched. See, from the cottage? Ethan interrupted. He was there. Yes, he drove by, told a lot of interesting things. There was silence. Eliana bit her lip. Oliver began to collect the cubes with double speed, and Ethan turned pale. I need to call my mom, he finally said and quickly left the room. I didn't stop him. Let Petunia know that I'd discovered everything. I wondered how she would get out of it. Eliana came up to me and said quietly, Grandfather, I'm so sorry. About what, sweetheart? About the big secret. Mommy said it was best for everyone. Aunt Iris and the others have no place to live, and your cottage is empty most of the year. But I think you should have told me. I looked at my granddaughter. There were tears in her eyes. This child was too pure of heart to participate in her mother's dirty machinations. Thank you for your honesty, Eliana. And don't worry too much. These are grown-up problems, and I'll deal with them. Are you very angry? Oliver asked, coming from the other side. Mom said you'd be very angry if you knew about the new house for Aunt Iris and everyone else. Everyone else? I interjected. How many are there? A lot, Oliver answered. Aunt Iris and Uncle Bram and their 4 kids, then Aunt Holly and Uncle Jasper and the triplets, then Uncle Vance and his new wife. That's enough, I raised my hand. I got it. An army of Petunia's relatives had taken over my cottage, and their children, and the construction, and all without a word to me, the owner. Now I knew the truth. Petunia hadn't sent her children to me because of a fictitious renovation. She wanted to keep me in town while her kinfolk got fully settled in at my cottage. Perhaps she hoped to confront me later, when their presence had become so ingrained that it would be morally impossible to evict them. Or knowing Petunia, she had an even more devious plan. Ethan came back into the room with the phone in his hand. Mom wants to talk to you, he said, handing me the phone. I took the phone, but before I started talking, I looked at the 3 kids. Why don't you go to your room? Your mom and I have grown-up things to discuss. When the kids left, I put the phone to my ear. Petunia, what a surprise. Aiden, her voice sounded tense but still confident. I think there's been a little misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I grinned. Interesting name for a trespass on private property. It's not a trespass, she countered. It's a temporary solution to a family problem. A problem you didn't see fit to inform me, the owner of the property. There was a pause. I was going to tell you, Petunia said at last. I was just waiting for the right time. Like when the extension would be completed? She was quiet again. Aiden, be reasonable. My family's in a difficult situation. They were evicted from the apartment complex where they lived. They had nowhere to go, and your cottage is empty most of the year. So instead of asking me for help, you decided to just take over my property? That's very sensible. I knew you'd say no. There was finally a hint of irritation in her voice. You've always been against my family, never hosting them, never inviting them to family gatherings. Because your family, Petunia, is a bunch of bums who spend their lives living off other people's money. And now they're doing it at my expense. That's not true. They've just been unlucky. All 20 of them? All at the same time? What an amazing coincidence. Pause again. I could almost see Petunia going over possible strategies in her head. What do you want? She finally asked. I want all your relatives to leave my cottage. Immediately. But they have nowhere to go. That's not my problem. Aiden, please. Her tone softened. Let's find a compromise. Maybe they could pay you rent? Or help with the upkeep of the property? I grinned. Petunia, you chose the wrong tactic. You should have asked me first, not confronted me. Now I'll do what I have to do. What do you mean? You'll see. In the meantime, tell your relatives they have 3 days to leave my property. After that, I'll call the police. You're not gonna do that, she said with uncertainty in her voice. Raven will never forgive you. It's a risk I'm willing to take. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. The time of confrontation had begun. But if Petunia thinks I'm just going to give in to her, she doesn't know me well. In my long career as a criminal psychologist, I've encountered people far more cunning and devious than her. And this was a game I wasn't about to lose. After I talked to Petunia, I couldn't calm down. I tossed and turned all night, imagining strangers trampling the paths that Veronica and I had laid, plucking apples from the trees we had planted together, changing the curtains that she had chosen so lovingly. These thoughts were unbearable. In the morning, I made a decision. I needed to see everything with my own eyes. The children had to go to school, and I had some free time. Children, I have something urgent to do today, I said at breakfast. I'll be back when you get home from school, but I've asked Mrs. Phelps to keep an eye on the apartment just in case. If you need anything, go to her. Mrs. Phelps was my neighbor, a widow of 65 with whom I had developed a good neighborly relationship. She agreed to back me up, even though the grandchildren were independent enough to go without supervision for a few hours. What are you doing? Ethan asked, looking at me carefully. A meeting with a former colleague, discussing old business, I answered evasively. Aren't you going somewhere else? He persisted. Out of town, for instance. No, of course not, I lied, looking him straight in the eye. Why would you think that? He looked away, clearly not convinced. I knew he'd call his mother as soon as I left, but I was counting on a head start. When the kids left for school, I quickly packed up, took the car keys, and drove to my Dacha. The journey took about an hour. The road to Pine Hills was picturesque. First suburbs with identical houses, then a forest highway winding between the hills. Normally this drive would have calmed me down, but today I was too excited. My heart was beating harder and harder as I got closer to the cottage. I tried to prepare myself mentally for what I would see, but the reality exceeded all expectations. First, I noticed an unusual number of cars parked along the driveway. 5 or 6 cars, some of them used, others quite decent. Then I saw a makeshift basketball court in the place where the lawn I had so carefully tended used to be. The rose bed that Veronica had planted 30 years ago, which I had maintained in her memory, had been trampled, and that was just the beginning. As I approached the house, I saw that the back porch had been turned into an extra room by covering it with a tarp and installing some semblance of a door. Laundry of all sizes and colors was drying on ropes between the trees. There were children's toys, folding chairs, and an inflatable pool. I stopped the car at a safe distance and just sat there for a while, looking at the mess. My home, my space, my memory. Everything had been desecrated by the invasion of people I didn't even know. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and headed toward the house. In the yard, several children of varying ages were playing some sort of noisy game. They froze when they saw me, an unfamiliar older man, walking determinedly toward the house. One of them, a boy of about 10 years old, ran inside shouting, "Aunt Iris, someone's coming!" A full-figured woman in a colorful robe came out on the porch. She had the same reddish hair as Petunia and the same wary look. "What can I do for you?" she asked, crossing her arms over her chest. "You can help by explaining what you're doing in my house," I answered calmly, though I was seething inside. She frowned. "In your house?" "Yes, it's my summer house. It's my private property, and I don't recall authorizing anyone to live here." Her face changed. First bewilderment, then recognition, then barely concealed fear. Are you, are you Aiden Blackwood? Raven's father? Yes. Oh. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear nervously. I'm Iris, Petunia's sister. She didn't say you were coming. I'm sure she didn't. She'd rather I never found out that my house had been turned into a dormitory for all her family. By this time, the other occupants of the house were starting to come out to the noise. I counted at least 10 adults of various ages and even more children. All of them looked at me anxiously. Look, Iris began conciliatorily. I understand that you're upset, but we're in a really bad situation. We were evicted from the apartment complex. We had nowhere to live. So you decided to break into someone else's house? I interrupted. We didn't break in, the tall man objected, standing next to Iris. Petunia gave us the key. She said you wouldn't use the cottage until May, and by then our apartment issue would be resolved. And you believed that I had consented to that? I grinned. They looked at each other. It was obvious that some of them were beginning to suspect that Petunia hadn't been completely honest with them. She said she made an agreement with you, muttered an older woman, apparently Petunia's mother, that you'd let us stay here temporarily. She lied to you, I said with a wave of my hands. Classic Petunia. The atmosphere had changed. Now they were looking at me with undisguised concern. What are you going to do? Asked the tall man I took to be Iris's husband. Should I call the police? I haven't decided yet, I answered. But first I'd like to see what you've done to my house. They reluctantly parted, allowing me to enter. What I saw inside was even worse than I'd expected. The living room, once spacious and bright, was now cluttered with extra furniture. My favorite chair had someone else's stuff lying on it. In the corner was a TV, which I never had. I preferred to read books. My bookcase had been pushed back against the wall, some shelves emptied to make room for some figurines and photos. The kitchen had turned into a catering area, with an extra stove dragged in from somewhere, and a giant refrigerator replacing my humble unit. Boxes of cereal, chips, and other food I'd never bought were everywhere. But the most painful part was seeing the bedroom. The room where Veronica and I used to spend summer evenings watching the sunset through the wide window had now been converted into a nursery. Our bed was gone, replaced by 2 bunk beds. Veronica's pictures were taken off the walls and put away somewhere. In their place were posters of cartoon characters. Where's our stuff? I asked, trying to stay calm. Personal belongings, pictures. We put everything neatly in boxes, Iris answered hastily. They're in the shed. Nothing is damaged, I promise. I nodded silently and continued my rounds. My storage room had turned into another bedroom. My bathroom now held at least a dozen towels and a battery of all sorts of shampoos, creams, and lotions. Worst of all, there was an ugly structure made of plywood and plastic attached to the back of the house, something between a porch and an extra room. What's that? I pointed to the addition. Well, we needed a place for Vance and his wife, Iris's husband explained. They're living there for now. But it's temporary, of course. Of course, I echoed, like this whole invasion. I stepped out into the backyard. My vegetable garden, which I had so carefully planned every spring, had been partially dug up. Some unfamiliar greenery now grew in place of my tomatoes. The apple trees I had pruned with such care looked neglected. One of the barns had been converted into some sort of workshop. I was so stunned by the magnitude of the disaster that I didn't immediately hear the noise of a car pulling up. It was only when several children ran screaming toward the front of the house that I realized someone had arrived. It was Petunia. She jumped out of her SUV like an enraged fury and headed straight for me. "What are you doing here?" she exclaimed without even saying hello. "You told the kids you had business in town." "And you told me you were renovating the house," I parried. Apparently, we'd both lied. Petunia looked like she was ready to explode, but held back because of the presence of her relatives, who were gathered around us, watching the scene intently. "We need to talk in private," she said, lowering her voice. "No," I shook my head. "What I have to say can be heard by everyone." I looked around at the crowd. "You have trespassed on my private property, altered it without my permission. You have used my resources. All of these are sufficient grounds for a criminal trespassing case." "Aiden," Petunia began in a conciliatory tone, I realize you're upset. Upset? I grinned bitterly. It's not upset, Petunia. It's rage. It's a sense of betrayal. And not just from you, but from my own son, who I'm sure knew about all of this. Raven didn't know all the details, she said quickly. He only knew that I was helping my family find temporary housing. Don't lie to me again. I held up my hand. I've had enough of your manipulations. I addressed the crowd again. You have 3 days to leave my property. If any of you are still here in 3 days, I will call the police and file trespassing and property damage charges. You can't do that, Petunia's mother exclaimed. We don't have any other place. It's not my problem, I replied firmly. You should have thought of that before you broke into someone else's house. We didn't, Iris objected. Petunia gave us the key. Without my permission. She had no right to use my property. Petunia stepped closer, lowering her voice. Aiden, please. Let's discuss this sensibly. My family is in a desperate situation. They really have nowhere to go. Does that justify the deception? I asked. Sending your children to me so I won't come here? Lying to them? Forcing them into your scheme? This is your family, Petunia, not mine. You should have sought a solution that didn't break the law or betray trust. I tried. There was desperation in her voice. But no one wanted to help. All the apartments were too expensive. No one wanted to rent to such a large group. So I thought of your cottage, which is empty most of the year. And you thought you could just take it without asking? She lowered her eyes. I knew you'd say no. Of course I would say no. This is my private space, Petunia. A place where I keep the memories of my wife. A place I've spent decades creating. Several women in the crowd began to sob. Children looked frightened. Men shuffled from foot to foot with a guilty look. But now that you see the position we're in, Petunia insisted, maybe you'll reconsider. At least give us more time than 3 days. It's impossible to find accommodation for everyone that quickly. And how long did it take you to move in here? I parried. And how long did it take you to remodel my house to suit your needs? By the looks of it, you did it pretty quickly. Petunia clenched her fists. Her face took on an expression I knew well, a calculating, predatory expression. If you do kick us out, Raven will never forgive you. You'll lose your son for good. I smiled. Blackmail, Petunia? How predictable. It's not blackmail, it's a fact. He loves me and my family. If you make them suffer, he'll be on my side. Perhaps, I shrugged. But you know what's interesting? At my age, having been through what I've been through, I've found that I have less and less patience left for toxic relationships. If the choice is between preserving a relationship with a son who allows you to manipulate yourself and me, and preserving my dignity, I choose dignity. Her face contorted with rage. You selfish old man. You've always put your principles before your family. And you, Petunia, have always put your desires before everything else, including the welfare of your own children. I circled the space around us. Look what you've gotten them into. They lied to me. They felt guilty. Eliana almost cried when she confessed your big secret. Is that what you want to teach them? That it's okay to take other people's stuff if you really want to? That it's okay to lie if it's convenient? Something resembling shame flashed in her eyes for a moment, but it quickly disappeared. I did what I had to do for my family. And I will do what I have to do. 3 days, Petunia. Not a day more. I turned to leave, but she grabbed my arm. Wait, let's find a compromise. Maybe they could stay until the end of the month. We'll pay the rent, and we'll rebuild everything when we leave. I looked at my house, disfigured, alien, filled with people who didn't even realize they'd done anything wrong. Perhaps I might have considered such an offer if you had asked me first, but not now, not after the deception. She didn't give up. What about the children? Have you thought about how this will affect your grandchildren? You're the one who should have thought about it before you involved them in this scheme. I cut her off. And by the way, how are you going to explain to them why they have to live with me for 6 months when your house is perfectly habitable and there are no repairs? Petunia turned pale. This aspect of her plan did not seem to have been fully thought out. We'll think of something, she mumbled. Of course you will, I nodded. Lies begat lies. It's a never-ending cycle. I took a few steps toward the car, then turned around one last time. One more thing. I'll check every corner of the house when you leave. If anything is damaged or missing, especially my personal belongings and photos, I'll sue you. I got in my car and drove off, leaving a stunned group of people behind. In the rearview mirror, I could see Petunia furiously saying something to the crowd, waving her arms. On the way home, I reflected on what had happened. Anger was still simmering inside me, but there was another feeling mixed in with it. Determination. Petunia had gone too far. She hadn't just deceived me. She had dragged the children into her deception. She had violated my boundaries in the most egregious way. She had tried to manipulate me with blackmail. But if she thought I would just accept it, she was sorely mistaken. I hadn't spent a lifetime as a criminal psychologist for nothing. I understood people, their motivations, their weaknesses, and I knew how to use that knowledge. Petunia and her family made a big mistake in underestimating me. They thought I was just a grumpy old man who could be easily tricked and circumvented. They didn't realize who they were dealing with. By the time I got home, a plan had already begun to form in my head. I would not just kick them out of my dacha. I would teach them a lesson they would not soon forget. A lesson about consequences, about respecting other people's boundaries, about not playing with a man who has spent decades exploring the dark corners of the human soul. The kids weren't home from school yet, and I was glad for that. I needed time to calm down and think through my next steps. I sat down in a chair and pulled out an old notebook. In it were contacts of people I'd worked with throughout my career. Police officers, lawyers, private investigators, people who could help me gather information about Petunia's family. I started taking notes. I needed to know everything. Their backgrounds, their weaknesses, their fears. Every detail could prove useful in my plan. Petunia thought she had won by moving her relatives into my summer house. But the game had just begun. And in this game, I had an advantage she didn't even realize. I knew how people who do wrong things think. I knew their psychology, and I was going to use that knowledge to the fullest. The doorbell interrupted my musings. It was the grandchildren returning from school. I put the notebook away and tried to adopt a calm demeanor. They didn't need to know I'd gone to the cottage, yet. But looking at their wary faces as they entered the apartment, I realized they already knew everything. Petunia had undoubtedly called them, or Raven. The game was on, and the kids were in the middle. Well, if Petunia thought it was okay to involve them in her scheming, then I wouldn't exclude them from my plan either. Perhaps they would even become my allies. After all, children often have a keener sense of justice than adults. "Grandpa," Ethan began, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Mom called. She said you were at the cottage." "Yes," I nodded, deciding not to deny the obvious. "I was there." "And are you angry?" Oliver asked, looking at me wide-eyed. "I'm disappointed," I answered honestly. "Disappointed that your mom decided to deceive me. I'm disappointed that she dragged you into this lie." Eliana came over to me and hugged me unexpectedly. "I'm sorry, grandfather. I didn't like lying to you." I hugged her back, feeling some of my rage melt away. Children aren't to blame for the scheming of adults. "I know that, sweetheart, and I'm not mad at you. You were just doing what your mom said." "What's going to happen now?" Ethan asked. "With the cottage and, with us?" I looked at him with a long look. "It depends on many things. But one thing I can say for sure, I will not let my cottage be treated the way it is now." The grandchildren looked at each other, and I saw in their eyes a mixture of fear and relief. Fear of the unknown and relief that the deception had been exposed. "Now," I straightened up, "who wants to help me make dinner?" The game was on, and I was determined to win it. But first I had to take care of the children who were pawns in someone else's game. Petunia will regret underestimating the old psychologist and his ability to plan revenge. The night after the trip to the cottage, I hardly slept at all. My head was full of thoughts about what had happened and plans for the future. I knew I had to proceed with caution. When I was younger, I could have just stormed into the cottage with the police and kicked everyone out. But now, with 3 grandchildren in my care and complicated family ties, I had to be more strategic. In the morning, as the kids were getting ready for school, I noticed they were avoiding making eye contact with me, especially Ethan, who was clearly feeling guilty. I decided not to reveal what I knew about Petunia's phone call yesterday. Let them think their secret was still safe. Kids, I said at breakfast, I thought we should get to know each other better. After all, we're going to be living together for quite a while. They looked at each other anxiously. Eliana began to rub the edge of her shirt, a gesture I'd noticed when she was nervous. What are you suggesting? Ethan asked, trying to look nonchalant. How about we do something new together every day? Today, for example, we could go to the Natural History Museum after school. I hear there's a new exhibit there about dinosaurs. Oliver's face brightened up instantly. Really? I love dinosaurs. I even have a Tyrannosaurus t-shirt. Great, I smiled. Then I'll pick you up after school and we'll head over there. Eliana and Ethan were less enthusiastic, but they didn't object. I could see that they were confused. I didn't usually show such enthusiasm for joint entertainment. When they left for school, I immediately got to work. I pulled out an old contact book and called Malcolm Reed, a former police colleague with whom we had maintained a friendly relationship. Malcolm, it's Aiden Blackwood. Yeah, it's been a while. No, I'm fine, but I need some help. I explained the situation, leaving out some personal details. Malcolm, always willing to help an old friend, agreed to gather information on Scarlett's family. Give me a couple days, Aiden, he said. If any of them have skeletons in their closet, I'll find them. The next caller was Harold Winters, a private investigator I'd worked with on several complex cases. He specialized in financial fraud and could find information unavailable through normal methods. Harry, I want everything I can find on the Scarlett family. I'm particularly interested in financial affairs, debts, credit history. I suspect their predicament isn't quite what they're describing. Harold agreed to look into it and promised to get back to me in a couple days. Finally, I contacted Amelia Thorne, a real estate attorney. She had always given me good legal advice, and I needed it now. Amelia, what are my legal avenues to evict the illegal occupants from my summer house? She asked a few clarifying questions, then said, You have a strong position, Aiden. They've trespassed without your permission, perhaps even damaged the property. We could start with a formal eviction notice, and then, if they don't comply, get the sheriff involved. What about the fact that they built an addition without permission? Oh, that's even more serious. Zoning violations, building code violations. You could get the city involved. I thanked her for her advice and promised to keep her informed. After I finished making phone calls, I went to the library. The local newspaper archives were available there, and I wanted to see if there was any mention of the Scarlett family in the past. A few hours of searching yielded some interesting results. An article from 3 years ago about how residents of the Sunny Hills apartment complex had complained about a family that threw raucous parties and didn't follow the rules of the dormitory. No last name was mentioned, but the description and address matched what I knew about Petunia's relatives. Back home, I had time to make dinner and picked up the kids after school as promised. The Natural History Museum turned out to be a great idea. Oliver was excited about the dinosaurs, and Eliana was interested in the mineral exhibit. Even Ethan, who at first pretended to be bored, eventually got interested in the interactive exhibit about space. On the way home, I made an unobtrusive conversation. Tell me about your mom and dad. What are they like in everyday life? The children exchanged wary glances again. Dad works a lot, Ethan began. He is an accountant in a big company. He comes back late and often takes work home. And Mom, I continued. Mom, she's always busy, Eliana said. She has a lot of things to do with her relatives. She says that family is the most important thing, and we should always help each other. Which of your mom's relatives do you like the most? I asked, as if by the way. Aunt Iris, Oliver exclaimed. She always brings candy, and she lets me watch cartoons, even when Mom says it's past my bedtime. And I like Uncle Vance, said Ethan. He plays a great guitar and tells funny stories. And I love Grandma, Eliana added. She taught me how to bake cookies and tells me stories about when my mom was little. I listened intently, memorizing the names and characteristics of each family member. This information could be helpful. What do you think of our cottage? I asked, deliberately using our. Do you like it there? The children froze, not knowing what to say. I quickly added, I mean, when you've been there before, on weekends or holidays, we didn't go there very often, Ethan said cautiously. But it's beautiful there, Eliana added. Lots of trees and flowers. And the pond isn't far away. And all our relatives live there now. Oliver blurted out before Ethan could stop him. There was a heavy silence. Ethan looked as if he wanted to fall through the ground. Eliana turned pale, and Oliver, realizing that he had said something wrong, began to fidget nervously on the seat. Relatives? At my cottage? I acted surprised. Why didn't I know anything about this? It, it was a surprise, Eliana said quickly, trying to make up for it. Mom wanted to surprise you. What an interesting surprise. I kept my cool. And how long have they been there? Ethan, realizing that it was useless to deny, sighed. About 2 weeks. Mom said that they had problems with housing, and they would live there temporarily until they found something else. Is that why she sent you to me? So I wouldn't find out about it? The children were silent, which in itself was an answer. I'm not angry with you, I said softly. You were just doing what your mom asked, but cheating isn't the best way to solve problems. Are you going to kick them out now? Oliver asked anxiously. Where will they go? I haven't decided yet, I answered honestly. But I don't like it when people lie to me and use my property without asking. At home, I made dinner, and we spent the evening playing board games. I noticed that the children became more relaxed. Perhaps they were relieved that they no longer had to keep a secret. The next day, I got the first results from Malcolm. He called when the kids were at school. Aiden, I found something. Your suspicious son-in-law, Bram, Iris's husband, was involved in insurance fraud 3 years ago. The charges were eventually dropped, but there's no smoke without fire. And Vance, Petunia's brother, has a habit of not paying child support to his ex-wife. He's got 2 unpaid DUIs. So on a renter, what about Iris herself? Clean as a whistle as far as I can tell, but her husband's a real piece of work. I thanked Malcolm for the information. A piece of the puzzle was starting to come together. Harold called in the evening. Aiden, the financial picture isn't looking so good. Iris and Bram have declared bankruptcy twice in the last 5 years. Holly and Jasper have huge credit card debts. And Petunia's mother receives welfare, yet somehow pays bills that clearly exceed her income. What do you think? A financial fraud scheme? More like a parasitic scheme. They're used to living off other people's money, loans from friends who don't pay back, temporary residency that drags on for years. Classic case. This information got me thinking. I had always suspected that Petunia's family was not noted for its high moral principles, but now I had concrete facts. The next day, the kids and I went to an amusement park. I deliberately chose activities that would bring us closer together. And it worked. The kids became more and more open with me. After lunch, as we sat on a bench eating ice cream, Eliana suddenly said, Grandpa, I don't like that Mom made us trick you. It's not fair. I don't like it either, Oliver added. I feel bad. Ethan was silent, but I could see that he was worried too. You're not bad, I assured them. Sometimes adults put children in difficult situations, and it's not always easy to understand how to do the right thing. But what do we do now? Eliana asked. Mom will be mad if she finds out we told you. You could just say that Oliver told you by accident, I suggested. It wouldn't even be a lie. Oliver lowered his head guiltily, but I tapped him on the shoulder. Don't worry. Sometimes the truth is the best thing that can happen, even if it comes out by accident. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I got another call from Harold. Aiden, I found something interesting. You know why they were evicted from the apartment complex? They hadn't paid rent for 3 months straight, but Bram just bought a new car, and they threw such loud parties that the neighbors complained all the time. Thanks, Harry. That explains a lot. And one more thing. I spoke to the manager of that complex. He said they left the apartment in a terrible state. Broken furniture, holes in the walls, filth. The manager said he would never rent to them again. This news only strengthened my resolve not to let them stay at my cottage. They are not just needy relatives. They are irresponsible people who have no respect for other people's property. The next day, I decided to see if the children were willing to help me. After dinner, I said, as if in between, You know, I keep thinking about the Dacha situation. I think it would be fair if your relatives would at least pay rent for the use of my property. But for that, I need to know how many of them live there now, and how exactly they use the house. Ethan unexpectedly nodded. That's fair. They should pay if they live there. Can you tell me exactly who is there now? I asked. To my surprise, Ethan pulled out his phone and showed me the pictures they had taken at the cottage a couple weeks ago, before they moved in with me. On them, I saw the whole fair company. Iris and Bram with 4 kids of different ages, Holly and Jasper with teenage triplets, Vance and his new wife, Petunia's mother, and a few other people I didn't know. Who are these people? I asked, pointing at the strangers. They are Uncle Vance's friends, Ethan answered. They were homeless too, and my mom let them live with the others. Friends? I couldn't believe my ears. They weren't even related? No, but Mom said that friends are almost family too, Ethan explained. I barely contained my indignation. Petunia not only moved all her relatives into my cottage, but she let them bring strangers. What do they do with the bedrooms? I asked. How are they all housed? Aunt Iris and Uncle Bram and their children have taken the master bedroom and the guest bedroom, Eliana said. Grandma lives in the small bedroom. Holly, Jasper, and the triplets sleep in the living room on the pull-out couches. And Uncle Vance and his wife are in the new addition they built in the back. And Vance's friends? They put up tents in the backyard, Oliver said, and sometimes they sleep in the barn. I groaned mentally. My cottage had turned into a gypsy camp. Do they even keep order? I asked. Cleaning? Tending the garden? The children looked at each other. Not very much, Ethan honestly admitted. Aunt Iris tried to organize cleaning duty, but no one wanted to do it. And Uncle Vance said he wouldn't hump someone else's garden. My irritation grew with each new detail. Not only were these people illegally occupying my property, but they were treating it with disdain. Was there anyone among them who was strange? I asked cautiously. Someone who scares you or behaves unusually? Uncle Vance's friend Quincy, Eliana said immediately. He's always telling scary stories about ghosts and curses. Even the grown-ups are afraid of him. Aunt Holly is also very superstitious, Ethan added. She believes in signs and omens. Once she didn't leave her room all day because she saw a crow on the windowsill and thought it was a bad omen. Uncle Bram is afraid of thunderstorms, said Oliver. He hides in the closet when there's thunder. I mentally jotted down all these details. They could be useful for my plan. What does your mom say about all this? I asked. About how they live there? She was glad at first that she could help them, Ethan said. But then, when she came to check on them, I heard her arguing with Aunt Iris. Something about how they should keep a better eye on the house and that it was all temporary. But no one is looking for another place to live, Eliana added. I heard grandmother say that they were very lucky to have the cottage and that they could have lived there permanently if you hadn't found out. That last sentence finally convinced me that I was doing the right thing. They weren't planning on leaving. They were planning on making my Dacha their permanent home. Thank you for telling me all this, I said to the children. You did the right thing. Now who wants to watch a movie before bed? That night, when everyone was asleep, I sat in my office and worked out a plan. Using the information I had gotten from the kids and my old contacts, I began to strategize a way to get the uninvited guests out of my cottage in a way that would make them want to leave. I knew their weaknesses: Holly's superstition, Bram's fear of thunderstorms, Quincy's strange stories that frightened everyone else. I knew their financial situation and the questionable past of some of them. Most importantly, I now had allies in the form of my grandchildren, who seemed to be beginning to realize that the behavior of their mother and her relatives was wrong. A plan began to take shape in my head. I wasn't going to resort to brute force or legal battles that could permanently damage my relationship with my son and grandchildren. Instead, I decided to use a psychological approach, my professional specialty. I would create such conditions at the cottage that Petunia's relatives themselves would want to leave as soon as possible. The next day, I received another call from Amelia. Aiden, I found an interesting legal precedent. If illegal occupants have damaged your property, especially if they have done unauthorized construction, you can not only evict them, but also claim compensation for the damage. Thank you, Amelia. I'll keep that in mind if I decide to go the legal route. But I already knew I had chosen a different path, more cunning, more psychological, and probably more effective in the long run. That evening, Eliana came to me with a drawing. It was a picture of our cottage, but not in the state it was in now, but as it could be, well-maintained, with a beautiful garden, with a family, obviously me and my grandchildren, picnicking on the lawn. "This is for you, Grandpa," she said, holding out the drawing. "I want the Dacha to be as beautiful again as it is in the drawing." I was touched. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's what I want too. And you know what? I think we can do it together." "You do?" Her eyes light up. "How?" "I have a plan," I said, "and I may need your help." "I'll help," Eliana said firmly. "And I think Ethan and Oliver will help too. We don't like that Aunt Iris and the others are treating your house so badly." At that moment, I realized I wasn't alone in my confrontation with Petunia and her kin. I had allies. My own grandchildren who, despite their young age, realized that something wrong was happening and wanted to fix it. Later that evening, I spoke to all three children and carefully explained my idea to them. I wasn't going to do anything illegal or dangerous, just to create an atmosphere at the cottage that would make Petunia's relatives want to leave on their own. To my surprise and joy, the children not only agreed to help, but also began to suggest their own ideas. Ethan, for example, knew how to create mysterious sounds with simple devices. Eliana could draw spooky signs that would scare superstitious Holly. And Oliver knew all his aunts and uncles' fears and could tell him exactly what to press. I went to bed that night with a sense of satisfaction. Not only had I found a way to get the cottage back without resorting to scandals and lawsuits, but I had also grown closer to my grandchildren than I had ever expected. They opened up to me, trusted me, and I suddenly found myself enjoying their company. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a family again. Not the toxic environment Petunia had created, but a real, sincere relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. And that was the most unexpected and valuable outcome of this whole unpleasant history. With these thoughts, I fell asleep, ready to start implementing my plan for the next day. A plan that would not only give me back my property, but also teach a lesson to those who thought it possible to intrude so unceremoniously into another's life. The revenge plan began to take clear shape in my mind. After the grandchildren agreed to help me, we held a sort of war council in the kitchen. I laid out on the table a plan of the Dacha, which I drew from memory, and we began to develop a strategy. "So the first thing we need to do is to find out which of the relatives is the most suggestible," I said. "Who would be the easiest to scare so that they could become our unwitting panic agent amongst the rest?" "Aunt Holly," Eliana said immediately. "She's scared of everything in the world. Yesterday she called her mom in hysterics because she found a dead bird in the garden and thought it was a sign of trouble." I nodded. "Great. So Aunt Holly will be our first target. What else do you know about your relatives' fears?" It turned out the kids knew a surprising amount. Uncle Bram was afraid of thunderstorms and the supernatural. Uncle Vance, despite his brave appearance, was terrified of spiders. Aunt Iris couldn't stand silence and always had the TV or radio on, even when she was asleep. Grandma was superstitious and strictly observed all omens. And Uncle Vance's friend Quincy was afraid of the dark and always slept with the lights on. "That's a gold mine," I smiled. "Now we need to devise a series of random events that will make them believe that something strange is going on at the cottage." We decided to start small, with mysterious sounds at night. Ethan, it turns out, was a master of creating spooky sound effects using a regular smartphone and small speakers. He suggested recording some ominous whispers and mysterious creaks, and then using a remote control to play them in different parts of the house in the middle of the night. "I can set a timer to play the sounds at 3 o'clock in the morning," he explained. "That's the scariest time, because everyone is sleeping extra soundly, and any sound seems supernatural." Eliana suggested drawing a series of strange symbols, supposedly ancient and ominous, that we could secretly place throughout the house under rugs, behind paintings, and desk drawers. "I could also draw a crow looking out the window," she added, "and put the drawing where Aunt Holly would find it in the morning. She's sure to be frightened." Oliver, the youngest, wanted to get involved too. He figured out how to create a ghostly figure using a sheet and a flashlight that could be glimpsed through the window at night. I was amazed at the ingenuity of the children. They approached the task with an enthusiasm and creativity that any professional hoaxer would envy. But we needed access to the cottage to pull it off. "How would we get to the cottage?" Ethan asked. "After all, You told them that they had 3 days to move out, and they obviously weren't going to do it. I smiled. I have a spare set of keys, and I know the cottage like the back of my hand, including all the creaking floorboards and all the secret hiding places. Besides, I had a plan. The plan was simple. We'll tell Petunia that I've decided to give her relatives more time to find a new place to live, but I want to check the condition of the Dacha. My grandchildren and I would come for the inspection, and while I would distract the adults with conversation, the children could discreetly place our surprises throughout the house. Petunia was too confident to suspect a catch. When I called her the next day, she readily agreed to our inspection, probably figuring she could convince me to let her in-laws stay a while longer. On Saturday morning, we left for the cottage. The kids were excited, as if they were going on a secret mission. Each of them had a backpack with the necessary tools. I had prepared myself too, taking a few small electronic devices that I could discreetly install in key locations. When we arrived at the Dacha, we were greeted by Petunia with a strained smile. Standing next to her was Iris, her sister, who tried to look friendly, but I could read wariness in her eyes. "Aiden, children, how nice to see you," Petunia exclaimed. "We were just making dinner. Are you staying?" "Not for long," I answered. "I just want to look around the house and make sure everything is in order, and to give the children a chance to see the cottage, since they had hardly ever been here before." The children instantly got into the game. They started running around the house, ostensibly exploring it, but actually placing our surprises. I saw Eliana accidentally drop her crow drawing near Holly's chair. Ethan, under the guise of interest in the music center, set up his miniature speakers in inconspicuous places. And Oliver, playing hide-and-seek with the younger children of his relatives, hid several mysterious objects in different parts of the house. Meanwhile, I was carefully inspecting the Dacha, pretending to check the condition of the property, but in reality, memorizing the location of all the things and noting the places where I could arrange accidental breakdowns of household appliances. For example, I noticed that the refrigerator is plugged in through an extension cord with loose contacts, the perfect place to create mysterious power outages. "Everything looks okay," I said to Petunia, with a look on my face like I was expecting much worse. "Although I did notice that you moved some of the furniture around." "Yes, we had to adapt the space a bit," she replied, "but we'll put everything back when we leave." "And when will that be?" I asked directly. Petunia hesitated. We're actively looking for a new place to live, but the market is so difficult right now." "I understand," I nodded. "Well, I hope you'll find something suitable soon." We stayed at the cottage for about 2 hours, long enough for the children to place all our surprises and for me to discreetly make some modifications to the electrical and plumbing systems. Nothing dangerous, just a few small changes that would cause mysterious interruptions in the appliances. As we drove away, Petunia looked relieved, having apparently decided that the danger had passed and that I had accepted the situation. She was wrong. That same evening, Ethan activated his sound system. At 3 o'clock in the morning, quiet but clearly audible whispers, creaks, and groans began to echo throughout the house. We could only imagine the reaction of the cottage residents, but judging by the fact that Petunia called Raven the next day, who then called me back, and was excited about the strange noises in the cottage, our plan was beginning to work. "Dad, did you hear anything unusual when you were at the cottage?" Raven asked. "No, nothing," I answered innocently. "What's wrong?" Petunia said there were noises in the house all night. It was as if someone was walking through the rooms and whispering something. Everyone was scared. "It must be the old house creaking," I suggested. "Or maybe there were mice." I'd been meaning to check the attic for a while. The second phase of our plan involved accidental appliance breakdowns. I secretly set the refrigerator so that it would occasionally shut off, especially at night, making a loud crackling noise. I also slightly loosened the chandelier in the living room so that it began to sway faintly for no apparent reason. 3 days after our visit, Holly found a drawing of Eliana with a crow. According to Raven, who received another call from an alarmed Petunia, she had become quite hysterical, claiming that it was a sign of death and that the house was cursed. "Dad, what's going on at the cottage?" Raven asked. "Petunia says something strange is going on there. First the sounds, now these ominous drawings." "I have no idea," I answered. Maybe it's Iris's kids playing around, or were Vance's friends playing a trick on everyone. Our next move was even trickier. Oliver, who had befriended Iris's youngest son during our visit, told him in confidence that there used to be an old cemetery on the site of our cottage, and that sometimes the spirits of the dead returned to drive away unwelcome guests. "Grandfather told it to me," Oliver said in a conspiratorial whisper. "But he's not afraid of ghosts because they know him and respect him, but they don't like outsiders." The story, as we expected, spread among the children with the speed of a forest fire, and from them it spread to the adults. Soon the whole Dacha was buzzing with talk of ghosts and curses. The fourth stage of our plan was designed for the most superstitious members of Petunia's family. Eliana drew a series of ancient symbols and mystical signs, which we secretly placed in various parts of the house, under pillows, behind mirrors, in closets. Every time someone found such a sign, the panic increased. "Dad, this is getting out of hand," Raven called me a week after our operation began. "Petunia is terrified. She says there's something supernatural going on at the cottage. Holly has already left with her children. She refuses to stay there. And Vance's friends have packed up too." "Really?" I acted surprised. "That's a shame. Maybe the house just wasn't used to so many people." Petunia didn't give up so easily. She came to the cottage with some paranormal expert who went around the house with some devices and announced that no supernatural activity was detected. But that same evening, Ethan activated his most frightening sound recording, a baby crying, changing to a strange laughter. And the expert ran away first, abandoning his instruments. Vance and his wife were the next to leave. After their cozy outhouse started leaking during perfectly clear weather, I did a little work on the roof guttering. They decided they'd had enough. "Dad, half the people have already left," Raven reported in another phone call. "Petunia is furious. She thinks someone is deliberately scaring them. She suspects the neighbors." "What a ridiculous idea," I said. "Who needs to go to all this trouble?" There were the stalwarts Iris and her husband and children, Petunia's mother, and a couple of distant relatives whose names I didn't even know. For them, we had prepared the final chord. On Friday night, when Petunia herself came to the cottage to figure out what was going on, we put on a real show. Ethan programmed all his speakers to play ominous sounds simultaneously. I remotely activated several electronic devices that caused power outages throughout the house, and Eliana had prepared a special surprise, a series of notes with the names of all the Dacha's occupants and an ominous warning: "Leave before it's too late." Raven called me in the middle of the night. "Daddy, something unimaginable is happening there. Petunia's hysterical. The whole house is shaking. The doors are opening and closing on their own, and there are creepy noises everywhere. And someone left threatening notes." "Oh my God," I sounded alarmed. "Did you call the police?" "Petunia doesn't want to. She's afraid the police will find out they're living there illegally." "I understand, but it sounds really scary. Maybe they should spend the night in a hotel." The next morning, Petunia called me herself, for the first time in ages. "Aiden," her voice shook with rage and fear, "I don't know what's going on at your cottage, but we can't stay there any longer. My family is scared to death." "That's a shame," I said with feigned sympathy. "So you're moving out?" "We have no choice. This house, there's something wrong with it." "Maybe it just doesn't take uninvited guests," I said. There was a pause. I could almost see the realization happening in Petunia's head. "It's you," she said at last. "You're the one who made this whole spectacle happen." "Me?" I acted surprised. "Petunia, I'm an old man who spent the last 2 weeks with your children. When do you think I turned into a master of special effects? I don't know how, but you did it. You wanted us out of there, and you got us out of there. We're leaving. That's it." "Glad to see common sense finally prevailed," I said, no longer hiding my satisfaction. "When will you vacate the house?" "No one will be there by the end of the week," she said. "But don't think that's the end of it, Aiden. You'll regret it." "Threatening the old man?" I grinned. "Not the wisest move, Petunia." She hung up. I turned to my grandchildren, who had been listening to the whole conversation with bated breath. "We won," I said. "They're leaving." The children shouted with joy and rushed to hug each other. Our covert operation ended in complete success. On Sunday, we went to the cottage to make sure that everyone had really moved out. To our satisfaction, the house was empty. Everywhere there were signs of a hasty departure. Forgotten things, untidy garbage, moved furniture. But most importantly, no uninvited guests. Ugh, how could they live like this? Eliana exclaimed when she saw the state of the house. Everything is so dirty and broken. It's okay, I put my arm around her shoulders. We'll fix it. Together. And we really got to work. All day long we cleaned. We put the furniture back where it belonged. I was touched by how sincerely the children cared for my home, how diligently they erased all traces of their slovenly relatives' stay. Toward evening, we took a break and sat on the veranda watching the sun go down. The house still needed a lot of work, but it was beginning to return to its former state. Grandpa, Ethan said suddenly, aren't you afraid that Mom will be very angry with us when she finds out that we helped you? I thought about it. It was an important question. She probably won't be happy, I answered honestly. But you did the right thing. Sometimes you have to choose between avoiding someone's wrath and doing the right thing. You chose conscience, and I'm proud of you. Can we come here with you in the summer? Oliver asked. It's so nice here. Of course you can, I smiled. This is as much your home as it is mine. You're part of a family, a real family that respects each other and other people's boundaries. Eliana snuggled up to me. Thank you, Grandpa. This has been the most fun adventure of my life. And I realized that despite all the trouble, this story had an unexpected positive outcome. I had really bonded with my grandchildren. They saw in me not just a grumpy old man, but a man with principles, ready to fight for what he thinks is right. And I saw in them not just noisy children, but individuals with their own values and sense of justice. Of course, I realized that the confrontation with Petunia wasn't over. She's not one to admit defeat easily. But now, with the support of my grandchildren, I felt prepared for any retaliatory moves she might make. The sun had set over the horizon, coloring the sky in shades of pink and gold. We sat on the veranda, enjoying the peace and quiet that had finally returned to this house. My home. Our home. Suddenly, there was the sound of a car pulling up. We all became alert. Who could it be? Had one of Petunia's relatives returned? In the fading dusk, I saw a familiar silhouette. It was Petunia, and judging by her determined gait, she was in the mood for a serious conversation. Children, go inside, I said calmly. I'll talk to your mother alone. The grandchildren reluctantly obeyed, but I noticed that Ethan had stopped at the window to watch us. Smart boy, always wanting to know what's going on. I stood up, preparing to face Petunia and her wrath. The game had moved into a new phase, and I was ready for the final confrontation. Petunia stopped a few steps away from the veranda, glaring at me angrily. Her silhouette seemed especially menacing in the fading twilight. Aiden, she hissed. I know it's you. At least admit it. I rose calmly from my chair, looking down at her from the veranda. Hello, Petunia. It's nice to see that you finally decided to visit me at my cottage. What a pity your relatives left so hastily. Stop this farce, she raised her voice. The sounds in the middle of the night, the strange notes, the sudden breakdowns, all of this is your doing. I don't know how you set it up, but I'm sure it's you. I smiled but didn't say anything back. Sometimes silence is the best way to throw your opponent off balance. You scared my relatives to death, she continued, climbing the veranda steps. My sister Iris is hysterical. Mother thinks the house is cursed. Even Bram, who has always been a skeptic, is convinced that something supernatural is going on here. How interesting, I made a surprised face. Perhaps your relatives have an overactive imagination, or perhaps a guilty conscience. A guilty conscience? She snorted. What are you talking about? Trespassing, for example, I said, waving my hands. Or that they used my cottage without asking permission. Or that they built an extension here without any documents. Shall I go on? Petunia narrowed her eyes. We were desperate. You would have said no anyway. And that justifies cheating? I shook my head. Petunia, I've studied human psychology for years. Do you know what I've noticed? People always find excuses for their wrong actions. There's always a good reason for them to break the rules that are binding on everyone else. She waved her hand impatiently. Leave your lectures. That's not why I came here. I want to know what you did to my children. They're acting strange. Eliana said she didn't want to go home, that she liked it at your place. What did you say to them? Nothing much, I shrugged. I just treated them with respect. Talked to them as individuals, not as pawns in your game. Petunia was confused for a moment, but she pulled herself together quickly. Never mind. I came to tell you we're moving out. That's it. No one will be here by tomorrow, but don't think that's the end of it. Are you threatening me? I smiled. Not the smartest move, considering I could go to the police and report you for trespassing on my property. You won't do that, she said confidently. Raven would never forgive you. Maybe, I agreed. But you know what's interesting? At my age, you start to realize whether it's more important to keep your dignity or to maintain a toxic relationship. I paused, looking her straight in the eye. By the way, how's Bram doing? Still running insurance scams? Or Vance, has he started paying alimony to his first wife yet? How's your mom doing? The IRS hasn't inquired about the source of the money she's living on? Petunia turned pale. Where did you... I still have connections, Petunia. I wasn't just a counseling psychologist. I worked with the police, with detectives, with lawyers. And when I need information, I know where to find it. It was a bluff, but only partially. I did learn something about her relatives, but not as much as I tried to show. Petunia's reaction, however, confirmed that I was onto something. You're gathering dirt on my family? Her voice shook with rage. How low? No lower than tricking 20 people into moving into someone else's house, I parried. But I'm not going to blackmail anyone. I just want you all to get out of here and leave me alone. At that moment, the door of the house opened, and 3 figures, my grandchildren, appeared on the doorstep. They looked wary, but determined. Mom, Ethan began, stepping forward. We have something to tell you. Petunia turned around, surprised by their appearance. Children, go inside. I have a talk with Grandpa. No, Eliana said with sudden firmness. We want to stay here, with Grandpa, for the summer. What? Petunia looked like she'd been hit. What are you talking about? We want to spend the summer here, Ethan repeated. Grandpa said we could. It's fun here, Oliver added. And we've already started fixing up the house after everyone left. Petunia looked from the children to me. What did you tell them? What did you brainwash them with? Nothing, I answered calmly. They can see and understand everything themselves. Children are very sensitive to injustice. Mom, Eliana came closer. What you did was wrong. You lied to Grandpa. You made us lie. And your relatives ruined his house. Petunia was speechless for a moment, shocked by her own daughter's candor. Eliana, you don't understand. Adult life is more complicated. No, Ethan interrupted her. It's simple. You cannot take someone else's without permission. We've been told that since we were kids. I couldn't help smiling when I saw my grandchildren defending their position. They had grown up in my eyes over the weeks, from Petunia's obedient puppets to independent individuals with their own principles. Okay, Petunia finally said, realizing she was losing the battle. We'll talk about this at home. Pack your things, we're leaving. Mom, Ethan took a step forward. We want to stay, at least for the weekend, to help Grandpa with the cleaning. Petunia looked stunned. She wasn't used to her children crossing her, especially taking the side of someone she considered her adversary. He's the one who turned you against me, her voice trailed off. Aiden, what did you say to them? What did you do to my children? I treated them with respect, I answered. I let them decide for themselves what was right and what was wrong. She turned to the children. We're leaving. Now. It's out of the question. Eliana and Oliver backed away, but Ethan stayed where he was. Then I'm going to call Dad. I'll tell him everything. How you made us lie to Grandpa. How you put all the relatives in his summer house without permission. How they ruined his things. It was an unexpected move. Petunia turned even paler. You wouldn't dare. I dare, Ethan looked determined. Dad always said to be honest. He had to know the truth. I could see Petunia frantically calculating her options. Raven, for all his gentleness, had always been a man of principle. He could turn a blind eye to a lot of things, but outright deception and manipulation of children was something he didn't tolerate. Okay, she finally said, giving up. You can stay the weekend, but I'll come back for you Sunday night, and we'll have a serious talk about all this. The children looked up in triumph. It was a small but significant victory. Petunia turned to me. And we're not done with you yet, Aiden. Raven will know you've turned the children against me. I didn't turn them against you, I said calmly. You did that when you thought you could use them in your scheme. Children are not stupid, Petunia. They see and understand everything. She clenched her fists, clearly holding back from saying something in front of the kids, then turned abruptly and headed for the car. Sunday, 6 o'clock at night, she said over her shoulder. Be ready. When she drove away, we all breathed a sigh of relief. Ethan came up to me. I'm really going to call Dad. He needs to know the truth. I put my hand on his shoulder. It's your decision, Ethan, but think carefully. The truth can hurt, especially the ones we love. I know, he nodded, but Dad deserves to know. He always taught us to be honest. I was proud of him. In his 12 years, he showed more moral fortitude than many adults. We spent the next 2 days tidying up the cottage. We cleaned up the trash left by Petunia's relatives, put the furniture back where it belonged, cleaned and washed everything that could be cleaned and washed. I retrieved boxes of my belongings from the barn that they had put away, and with the help of the grandchildren, returned Veronica's pictures to their rightful places. Saturday evening, as we sat on the porch enjoying the sunset and the feeling of accomplishment, there was the sound of a car pulling up. This time it was Raven. He looked serious and a little confused as he pulled up on the veranda. Dad, kids, he nodded. We need to talk. I nodded. Sure, Raven. Have a seat. The kids tensed. Ethan straightened up, ready to defend his position. Ethan called me yesterday, Raven began. Told me, an interesting story about what had been going on here the last few weeks. I waited in silence to see what he had to say next. I talked to Petunia, he continued. She denies it, of course. She says you turned the children against her. That it wasn't like that. What was? I asked calmly. Raven sighed heavily. I don't know, Dad, but I know my children. They wouldn't make up a story like that. I found pictures on Petunia's phone, pictures of the cottage filled with people, her relatives. I nodded. And what do you think about that? I think, he hesitated. I think what she did was wrong, very wrong. And I told her that. I was surprised. Raven rarely crossed Petunia about anything. We had a big fight, he continued. She accused me of always taking your side, that I didn't support her family. But that's not the point. The point is that she used our children in her scheme. She made them lie. This is out of line. I remained silent, letting him speak. I don't know what's going to happen next. He shook his head. But I want you to know that I don't approve of what she did. And I'm grateful that you've been so good to the kids no matter what. They're wonderful, I said sincerely. Smart, honest, with a sense of justice. You raised them well, Raven. He smiled weakly. Thank you, Dad. It means a lot, especially from you. There was an awkward pause between us. Too many unspoken things had accumulated over the years. So what now? I finally asked. The kids can stay with you for the weekend, as agreed, he said. And then, we'll see. Petunia is not at her best right now. Maybe it would be better for them to stay with you for a while. I was taken aback. It was an unexpected suggestion, especially coming from Raven, who had always tried to keep peace in the family at all costs. Of course, I nodded. They're always welcome. Yay, Oliver exclaimed, not hiding his joy. We're going to live at Grandpa's. Raven smiled, looking at his son. Not forever, kid, but for a while, yes. We talked for another hour or so. For the first time in years, Raven and I had a really frank conversation. He talked about his doubts, about how hard it had been for him to maneuver between Petunia and me all these years. I shared my regrets about being too strict a father, too critical, not supportive enough. When he left, something changed between us. I can't say that all the old wounds healed, but at least we began the journey toward healing. After he left, the children were unusually quiet. I realized they were worried about their parents, about their future. It's going to be okay, I said, hugging them. Sometimes adults need time to sort out their relationships, but they both love you, and that's what matters. On Sunday, we continued working on the restoration of the cottage. I showed my grandchildren how to fix simple things, how to tend the garden, how to cook on the old wood stove. They absorbed everything with amazing enthusiasm. After lunch, we sat on the bank of the pond, not far from the dacha. The children threw pebbles into the water, and I watched them, feeling a strange peace. Grandpa, Ethan said suddenly, you knew that Mom was going to put everyone at your cottage, didn't you? From the very beginning. I hesitated, then decided to be honest. I suspected that something was wrong. Your mother would never suggest that you stay with me without some ulterior motive. And you weren't angry with us? For being part of her plan? No, I shook my head. You're children. You did what the adults told you to do. But I was glad when you decided to help me. It was fun, Eliana admitted. It was like a spy movie. And we did the right thing, Ethan said confidently. You can't just take other people's stuff without asking. I smiled, looking at them. Despite all the troubles of the last few weeks, I felt strangely grateful to fate. Thanks to this situation, I had gained something I hadn't had in years, a real connection with my grandchildren. By 6 o'clock, we were back at the cottage, expecting Petunia to arrive. But instead of her, Raven arrived again. Petunia. She needs time, he explained. We thought it would be better for the children to stay with you for another week, if you don't mind. Of course it's okay with me. I was genuinely glad. We're having a great time together. Thanks, Daddy. Raven looked tired but grateful. I'm sorry about all this. The cottage, the deception. I didn't know all the details, but I should have known, and I should have stopped her. It's okay. I put my hand on his shoulder. We all make mistakes. When he left, the kids and I went back to the veranda. The sun was setting, coloring the sky shades of pink and gold. So we're staying another week? Oliver asked with hope in his voice. Yes, I nodded. And then we'll see. Maybe for the whole summer. That would be great, he exclaimed. We can go fishing and swimming in the pond. And as I listened to the children discuss their plans for the coming week, I felt a strange calmness. Despite all the turmoil, despite the uncertainty of the future, I knew that I had already received the most important thing, the sincere affection of my grandchildren, their trust, their love. The cottage was once again what it should have been, a refuge, a place to feel at home. And though Petunia probably wouldn't forgive me for this defeat, and my relationship with Raven was still fragile, I had no regrets. After all, at my age, you begin to realize what's really important in life. Not meaningless power struggles, not toxic relationships maintained out of a sense of duty, but true connection with those who truly value and respect you. As I looked at my grandchildren playing in the thickening dusk, I realized that I had gotten so much more than just my dacha back. I had gotten back a part of my family, the part that was worth the struggle.